Tim, and that's what it is. 93-point losses are devastating for a football club. Does that change anything in your mind about where Carlton and Brendan Bolton are at tonight?
Not so much tonight, but they're 1-8. Like, every loss means the record gets worse for the Carlton Footy Club, and I think there was an expectation coming into this season, and I think we've talked about the fact that there's been improvement, but there was an expectation coming into this season that they were going to be a better team. You need wins to be able to prove to everybody in the football world that you are better than what you were last year. They traded away that pick with the expectation that they were going to be better this year, and so far they haven't been able to produce the wins that I think they thought that they were going to be able to produce. And Brendan Bolton, with every loss, he gets further behind the 8 ball in terms of being able to convince people that he knows what he's doing. And that is a fact, an undeniable fact in this game.
I've been glass half full. Clearly they've got some talent, but the concern for me now, and after they got beaten by the Kangaroos, flogged by the Kangaroos, they had a response. We know that. The concern now is to us is how then 2 weeks later they back this up and serve that up again, what they did 2 weeks ago. So for me, the message isn't getting through. Clearly this group and the leaders of this group, and they've got a couple of leaders out, but the leaders of this group, surely they don't get ahead of themselves after a good performance, given that they're not winning games.
That's not possible.
They couldn't be, could they?
No, that's not possible.
No, surely the conversations are around wanting to get better, and they know if they bring effort, they can be competitive. Yes, they've been competitive, but now, after 2 big losses in 3 weeks, now there's some real red flags for me. Given how much talent they've got, I think they should be performing. I thought after that one 2 weeks ago, I didn't think we'd see that again for the rest of the year, and we've seen it straight away. So that's a red flag.
That is the concern for the club, that there's been 2 out of 3 non-competitive efforts, but they're adamant tonight. He won't be sacked. He won't be sacked this week. He won't be sacked anytime soon. They will review it at the end of the year. But right now, whilst they're obviously disappointed, they're holding a pretty firm line, and they say there won't be a review either. They've had a review of the club. Brad Lloyd has recently presented a strategic document to the board. So they feel as though they've got most of the pieces in place off the field. It's over to the players.
I think it's an ongoing review, though, and we have spoken about Carlton a lot this year, and we've talked about this fact too, that, you know, like Robert Walls is there, and I think that probably what he is doing is conducting an ongoing review of what's taking place, and he will be required at some stage, I would think, whether it's in a formal sense or it's in an informal sense, to report back on what it is that he's seeing and whether or not he believes, you know, where the blame lies. I mean, he's taking an overview look of the club, and where he associates or where he apportions that blame is whether it's going to be to the coach or the recruiting or what they've been doing elsewhere. But, you know, he's conducting that review that you're talking about.
So not of just Brendan Bolton. He's not there just to assess Bolton.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. Like, that would be part of it. And, you know, Wolsey's been around footy long enough to know what's good, what's not, and what you need to do to get better. He's been with good clubs and he's been with poor clubs, so he's seen it all.
I'm glad to hear you say that Carlton are going to back Brendan Bolton. I don't think there's anything to gain this year by pulling the trigger. It just doesn't have a benefit going forward. You get to the end of the year and then you work out what your best option is. But there is an enormous amount of speculation around, you know, it started a couple of weeks ago. We heard the grab around perhaps having a look at Alistair Clarkson. Yeah, we do this because that is the industry, and Mark Lejudice would be sitting there and thinking, OK, and the board are going to find out, you know, who they think is the best candidate. Does anyone jump out at that list that you don't?
Oh, they're all pretty good candidates. I think Brett Ratton would be much better coach second time round, no doubt about that. And all the other guys are proven coaches, so other than Brad Scott. But look, I agree. I don't think they should be sacking him after. And look, if this continued, he knows, and as you said before, Tim, he knows that the pressure is building, and you could see the look on his face when he's down in the room. He gets as disappointed, obviously, as anyone, and I guess for him he'd be frustrated as anyone because he sees the improvement, he sees what star factor he's got, and then they serve that up. But for me, that's effort-based, and you don't need talent. You don't need to be a top draft pick to go out there and give effort. Now, clearly, when you get beaten by that, like that, there's a lack of effort. So that's concerning.
Can we just have a quick chat about their list, Watto, for a moment? We saw 14 first-round draft picks in the graphic. It's more than GWS fielded on the weekend, and we all think that they've been, you know, afforded an enormous amount of talent. This theory that after their top 21, their depth is a bit of an issue. They get a couple of injuries and they really fall off big time. You've had a bit of a look at comparing them to what Brisbane Lions have done. When you compare 2015, they were both 4 wins at that stage.
4 wins at the end of the season.
So what do you make of that compared to the rebuild from the Brisbane Lions?
Well, what do we all think about the Brisbane Lions right now? Like, they are...
It's a great story.
They look like they're streets ahead of where Carlton are. Right?
They've surprised.
Okay, they started in the same position at the end of 2015. Bolton came to Carlton at the beginning of 2016. In that period of time, they're the draft picks for the Brisbane Lions, comparison to the Carlton draft picks, and they're the trade players that they've gone for. There's been a couple of hits there for Carlton, but there's been an awful lot of misses in those trades as well.
So does the heat need to come on to Stephen Silvani? He's been there 5 years
I
now.
think the heat has to come on everybody. I think it's too simple just to say, OK, your coach is the wrong person, OK. If this has been a rebuild, and that's the way it's been sold now, what, for 4 years in that period of time, they say, OK, we had to wipe the slate clean, we had to start again, and that rebuild is what we're seeing now, then you've got to question whether or not they have made the right selections and choices during that period of time. And not just talking about the early draft picks, because a lot of sides have improved their list by clever trading and being able to find players through rookie or through late third round, fourth round picks.
When in defence of Brendan Bolton, I will say that when Paul Roos went to Melbourne, Paul Roos takes a team with him, Tim. He takes a team along, he takes assistants, he brings other people into the footy club that he knows and trusts, and they've worked together before. When Brendan Bolton went to Carlton, who did he take? He has no relationships with anyone within the footy club. He has no, and then he's taking no one that he really knows too much about or trusts. And he's walking into a situation where all the pressure goes on him. Yet he hasn't handpicked or had any inclusion in any of that. Very difficult to do, I think, if you don't take people in with you.
Paul Roos worked at Melbourne. If you were Carlton, would you be looking at him?
Oh, I think his record stacks up. I think you'd be remiss not to go.
You'd be negligent if you didn't speak to him, at least sound him out. And look, he said that he wouldn't coach again, but every man has his price.
He did say that before Melbourne as well.
And here's a club that isn't and hasn't been afraid to open up the purse if it's the right person, be it a player or...
Write a cheque out now, Tim, and Paul Roos would come at the end of this year. Would you make that call now if you were part of the Carlton board?
The thing that I would need to determine with Paul Roos is whether or not he has the enthusiasm for this job, because I don't think I'd be wanting to go for somebody like Melbourne that just wanted to correct the ship and then hand it over to someone else. I think that Carlton need to find themselves a coach that's capable of taking what they've been able to assemble, add to it over the next 2 or 3 years to give themselves ultimately the opportunity to contest for a flag.